Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to an album ranking for the band Mr. Big. So they formed back in 1988 and released their debut album 1989, reached the top of the charts in 1992 with their #1 Billboard Hot 100 hit To Be With You. They had two amazing virtuoso guitar players in the lineup. Now they've broken up and reunited several times, have just come back recently reuniting in order to say goodbye, do a farewell tour, and they've just released their 10th studio album, and unfortunately looks to be their final studio album. So I thought, let's do an album ranking, count down all 10 studio albums. We'll get into that here in just a bit. But before we start, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're gonna stay up to date on everything going on in the world of music, just like this with an album ranking for the band Mr. Big. All right, so as I said, 10 studio albums. We're going to kick off at number 10, and coming in at number 10 is 10, simply titled 2024, their latest album. And at this point, final studio album, it appears to be, as the band is out on a farewell tour. Though frontman lead vocalist Eric Martin has said it might not be, because even though the band isn't going to be touring, they could still go back in and record, be a studio only band. I kind of hope that's the case. I love Mr. Big. I don't want him to be over. If I could still get new material from them, that would be great. This album here, I think, falls right into the wheelhouse of what Mr. Big is, although it does have quite a variety of styles on it. It goes through rock, blues, boogie, country, and even some pop music on here, which for me makes this album different than any of their other albums. And instead of the way they would do it previous to this, having elements of different musical styles that they would incorporate in to the standard song structure that is Mr. Big, these songs here are much more in that whole style, so you feel like you're moving through the different musical genres on it, and it's a quite wide range of styles to appear on an album. And therefore, that is why I'm putting this album in last place, but I'm not saying this is a bad album at all. I don't believe Mr. Big makes bad albums. I love all of them. This one here, a very good one, maybe given more time, because it actually only dropped just this past Friday. So, you know, I'm fairly new to it here, but I have to say, at least at this point, that's where it's coming in at. All right, coming in at number 9, The Stories We Could Tell from 2014. It's their 8th studio album. It's the last to feature drummer Pat Torpey on it as the sole drummer following his Parkinson's diagnosis, which was just 2 months before the release of this album. So it was kind of a shocking thing at the time, all the way around, of course, the whole story around all that is. But the album itself, very solid start to finish, carrying all the hallmarks of what makes a great Mr. Big album. Lots of guitar shredding right from the get-go on here, mixed with equal parts, melody, harmony, all that sort of stuff, the best way that Mr. Big knows how to do. But for this being the band's 8th studio album in their career, and being as good as it is, it really just shows how great each band member is at their instrument. And, you know, that said, it's coming in at number 9, really only because I don't reach for this album as much as I do other albums in the band's overall career or post-reunion era career. But as I said before, I don't think there's a bad album. It just happens to be that this one was falling where it falls. Coming in at number 8, Defying Gravity, 2017. It's their 9th studio album. Final album to feature drummer Pat Torpey. It was the first one, though, to feature drummer Matt Starr, who came in and assisted on drums. The album still follows much of what the band had been doing for their post-reunion era, which started in 2009, building on what made the band so great with the late 80s, early 90s era of the band, their original run, but expanding on that and exploring more, you know, sort of widening the palette that is Mr. Mr. Big. The album has quite a bit of exploration on it, kind of similar to what the album 10 is doing. So in the case that this album number 9 and 10 being the 10th, it's understandable where the band is going and how the band got to where they are for number 10. It's just on this one here, I feel like they incorporated better than the album 10 does. They're more distinct on those styles, more distinct on 10 than they are here. This is still very much got all the sort of the hallmarks and everything that I think make it a great album. So that's why it's coming in at number 8, just above their latest, but all in all, a good album. Coming in at number 7, Actual Size from 2001, 6th studio album, last album to for the band just prior to their breakup in 2002. Also the last album to feature guitarist Richie Kotzen, who had joined the band after being in Poison. Of course, he's with Winery Dogs, and he has a huge, very successful solo career that he does. But him, along with Paul Gilbert, being those two amazing virtuoso guitar players that the band has had in its long career. The album itself, I feel, is more song-oriented than other albums. Some of the other albums focus more on a technical prowess, or the more shred focused, or different things of that nature. And I feel like they really moved into more song-oriented tracks on it. And while, of course, having Eric Martin as the vocalist, and that's always going to make it sound like Mr. Big, I did feel as though without having him on it, I might not necessarily have known they were Mr. Big songs on here. And, you know, the other thing being that Richie Kotzen has always played in a more clean tone to the guitar than he has, say, his fellow counterpart Paul Gilbert. But whereas the previous album that Richie Kotzen was on, where it had more of an acoustic tone to it, this one returns that electric rock sound to it, even being that still clean tone to it. But I do enjoy how each of Mr. Big's albums have a different feel to them, and depending upon the view that you're the mood that you're really in, you have an album for that style. This one being, more song oriented. When I'm in the mood for that, I can reach for it, which is why it brings it in at number 7 for me. Coming in at number 6, What If from 2010, 7th studio album, and for me, a fantastic reunion album of the original lineup. First new album for them in 9 years, and I think it picks up right where the original lineup left off 14 years earlier with Hey Man in 1996. It just feels like they didn't miss a beat with this album here. There are so many good standout tracks on this album, and I feel like the band is firing on all 6 cylinders here. Not to mention that this album coming out in 2010, I think it was a really well-needed album at the time. One of the best, glam metal bands from back in the day putting out an album as good as it was at that point in time. Proved that the band still had a lot to say going forward, which I think they still do even today, but that is why this album is coming in at number 6. All right, halfway there, we're coming in on number 5 here. Bump Ahead, 1993, 3rd studio album, featuring the number 27 Billboard Hot 100 hit Wild World, the cover of the Cat Stevens song. So, even in 1993, this band was still doing things that were unheard of for glam metal bands. Having a top 40 Billboard hit when grunge being all the rage that it was, absolutely amazing. This being released 2 years on after their big breakthrough album Lean Into It from 1991, and only 1 year after the big hit that they had, To Be With You, which reached all the way to number 1 in 1992. The band here is really just continuing on with the same formula from that album, continuing that success, which is not to say it's a bad thing, but I felt it got a little bit formulaic, and so it's not an album that I reach for all that often. and why I'm putting it in here at number 5. But I do think it is a good album for what it is, and certainly when I'm in the mood for that particular style or want something that is more in line with the Lean Into It album, I will reach for this one here. Coming in at number 4, Get Over It, 1999, fifth studio album, first album to feature guitarist Richie Kotzen, who, like with his time in Poison, modified the sound of Mr. Big. That was kind of a shock at the time, but I very quickly grew into liking the new direction that Mr. Big was going with Richie Kotzen, bringing that more soulful rock sound the same way he did to Poison. And Richie, certainly a shredder with the best of them out there, and no different to what Paul Gilbert does. But as I mentioned earlier, Richie plays in a more clean guitar tone, whereas Paul Gilbert does the more distorted metal tone, certainly from his days with Racer X, where he came from before. And so therefore bringing, I think, a much needed breath of fresh air to Mr. Big. As much as I like Mr. Big, and I think all those earlier era albums with Paul Gilbert are absolutely fantastic, it had gotten a bit stale. And in that time and era and the change in the music and everything like that, bringing in Richie Kotzen the way that they did and allowing their song to evolve, I think was the right move for the band. It has become one of my favorite albums, not only from the band, but one of my favorite albums overall from 90s era bands in general, which is why it's ranking so high for me here at number 4, and certainly creating a great album above the original era lineup of the band. Coming in at number 3, Hey Man from 1996, fourth studio album. Last, I should say, to feature original guitarist Paul Gilbert before he chose to, leave the band and before his return to the group in 2009. I remember getting this album in 1996, and I was overly impressed with how good the album was, but how the band managed to make an amazing sounding album without holding on to all that earlier 90s era sound, the production, the glam metal sound, of the late 80s, early 90s sound. So they make an album that is full on Mr. Big. It's got the technical prowess, it's got the harmonies, it's got the beautifully written songs, all that sort of stuff, but they stripped some of that away and they moved more into a classic rock sounding vibe for the album itself. And this album being 3 years on from Bump Ahead, which I said I felt was a bit formulaic, and I felt like they had really grown in that 3-year time frame, and grown in a way that I think actually elevated the band. So this album here is why it's coming in higher than, say, Bump Ahead, some of the other ones there. Mr. Big was able to embrace who they were, make an unapologetic album for the time and era that it was in 1996, but at the same time still grow and change with the times. And I think that they're one of the best bands to be able to do that, to not lose sight of who they are, but at the same time still continue to grow and change. Coming in at number 2, self-titled 1989 debut studio album. This one here ran under the radar even for myself. I mean, my first experience with the band was their second album. This one here I did not know about. I do not remember hearing anything on the radio from it. Did not see anything on MTV. It's not to say they weren't there. I just wasn't seeing it. It wasn't being played enough, I guess. And so they barely made a dent with that album. Yet, this album here I feel is as good as the follow-up album Lean Into It from 1991. And, sometimes it's just a case of being at the right place at the right time, or in their case, wrong place at the wrong time. And they just maybe didn't have that unexpected hit like To Be With You that was on the follow-up album that really helped that one break out. Those sort of things didn't materialize, or it could have been, management or PR that didn't market it the right way. Who knows though? I think the album is great. As I said, I think it stands up to their second album, which is the big breakthrough album. This one here, should have been much bigger. It wasn't, but I think it's that good, which is why I'm going to go ahead and bring it in at number 2 here, because I think that the album itself should have had all of that success, even though it didn't, but it certainly stands up to that. And I know that for myself, and certainly a lot of fans, when we go back and we listen to Lean Into It, the next album we're going for and we're grabbing for is often this one here. All right, and if you couldn't already imagine which album it is, coming in at number 1, the well-deserved Lean Into It from 1991. Second studio album, the band's big breakthrough album featuring their one and only number 1 Billboard Hot 100 hit, To Be With You, which was a song, interestingly, nobody even wanted on the album, which is why it was the last track. It was just tacked on at the end. And then, lo and behold, in 1992, they have a hit with this song going all the way to number 1. And that's during the rise, the height of the grunge era, and not many glam metal bands can claim to have gone toe-to-toe with the grunge movement and actually won, being higher charting songs and albums and things at that time, and they certainly were able to do it. And that is certainly a case of right place, right time. You know, we have to remember that that was also the era of MTV Unplugged, and having an unplugged song the way that they did, as good as they did, I know certainly had a lot to do with that as well. But the album itself is not just simply a hit based on the number 1 hit that they had, To Be With You. For me, the band had built on the technical prowess of that debut, which I feel that album leaned a lot on that. Maybe why that album wasn't as successful, but for this album, they infused more soul, more groove, a lot of energy into this thing, all helping to make a much more well-rounded album. And so I feel that this album, their second album, is much more the well-rounded album, which is probably why it branched out and was able to be, enjoyed by a much wider audience, and, making the album more successful in the process of it. For me, this is why the album itself is coming in at number 1 for Mr. Big, even to this day, 33 years on after its release. And there you go. That is my Mr. Big album ranking, all 10 albums. Let's hope it doesn't end here with album number 10, although if it does, they have certainly had an amazing run. So let me know your thoughts. What is your number 1 album from Mr. Big? What do you think of the brand new album number 10? Check that out. I have done a full review of album number 10. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description below, and certainly stick around, check out more things on my channel. I got lots more album reviews, album rankings, discussion topics, you name it, I've got it. Lots of great stuff for you guys to explore. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.